Hi, my name is Dr. Rueban and I'm a law prof in Canada. Reading at the university level is very demanding. You'll often be reading material that's complex. Sometimes that material might contain familiar language. You might be able to understand the words on the page. But the ideas, the thoughts that are being communicated by that language may be unfamiliar and difficult. You might be reading theory, abstract concepts that are also very difficult to follow. It can seem like you're learning a new language. Given that you have a semester to master some material or maybe a year to understand lots of books and articles, how do you go about reading? So this video is about how you might try to make sense of difficult reading at the university level. The first thing to keep in mind is that when we talk about reading at the university level, we're talking about what we call active reading. We approach a book or an article with a set of questions. If we know what these questions are, then we are in a better position to understand what it is we're reading. Every book or article that you read at university tries to make an argument. So you have to learn to ask that book or article a set of questions to figure out the argument set out in that book or article. The first thing to look out for is terminology. When an author is going to set out an argument, they might use special terms, special language that carries a very specific meaning. Sometimes the author might use a familiar word. For example, you might read a theory about politics where the author, say for instance, John Rawls, who is a very famous liberal political philosopher, speaks of the notion of the reasonable. The word reasonable might be very familiar, but when Rawls uses the word reasonable, he means some very specific things. So you have to look for those parts of the book where the author explains what they mean when they use a particular word or phrase. If you don't figure out the terminology of the book, it'll be difficult to follow what's going on. The second thing to look for is the thesis. Nearly all the reading you do at university involves the author advancing a thesis or a major claim that they want to defend. The good news is that the thesis is often found in the introduction of the first chapter of a book. And if you can't really find it there because you haven't seen the phrase, in this book I will argue, or the major claim of this book is, or article is, look at the conclusion. Because in the conclusion of the book or the article, the author will usually restate the thesis that they are trying to defend. You need to understand what the thesis of a particular reading happens to be in order to be able to understand the argument and later on to evaluate it. Now let's turn to the argument. As I mentioned, whether you're reading a book or an article at the university level, you're looking for an argument. So how do you find it? Well, usually, and this may be good news or bad news depending on how you look at it, the most difficult part of a reading is where you'll find the argument. It is probably that part of the reading that you find the most difficult to understand. In a book, the argument can be spread over several chapters. What you're looking for as clues that you're reading for an argument, well, that's where the argument is. It's not merely the difficulty of what you're reading, but language. If, then, therefore. Language that expresses the logical connection between different kinds of claims. If you see these kinds of words, then you have found the argument. So you need to be able to identify the argument. And of course, if you don't understand the argument, go and see your prof. That's why they get paid the big bucks, to help you to understand the argument in the book or the article. The next thing you want to look for as you go through the text, of course, besides the argument, is really you want to start looking for the hidden assumptions, the things that the author doesn't say in the text itself, because that's going to be the basis, often the basis for your essay. So you want to look at where the author says that he or she does not deal with certain issues or things that they talk about in the footnotes. These are often places where an author is far more honest and clear about what they think or what they're unsure about. And these are clues that will help you to better understand what it is you're reading. Now, let's say you've tried these techniques. You've had a look at your book or article, you've applied these questions, you're taking notes, you're trying to answer these questions, and you find it difficult. What should you do? Well, the good news is, of course, that for most things that you read at university, there's lots of secondary resources. There are books about other books, articles about other articles, and you will find summaries of what it is you're reading about in those secondary sources. Of course, you can look to the internet. You can look to Wikipedia. As it turns out, Wikipedia is a pretty good resource for trying to help you better understand those things you're reading, especially if it's a difficult material that has a standing within some particular discipline. My only caution is when you write your essay, don't cite out of Wikipedia. You've got to cite out of the actual sources themselves. So hopefully with these tips, you'll be able to navigate the complicated and challenging world of reading at the university level.